My lungs are burning. It's a dry, scratching heat that starts in the back of my throat and claws its way down into my chest. I can't tell if the air is actually getting thinner as I climb, or if my body is simply forgetting how to function under the weight of this absolute, suffocating silence. I shouldn't have looked back. That's the first rule of the woods, isn't it? Never look back to see what's following you. Because once you acknowledge it, it becomes real. I'm huddled behind a rotted, moss-covered cedar right now. My heart is hitting my ribs so hard, I'm afraid the sound will give me away. It's a wet, rhythmic thumping that echoes in my ears. I'm trying to keep my breathing shallow, but every gasp feels like a siren in this stillness. It's not a bear. I've tracked bears. I know how they move, how they smell. Bears don't hum. They don't mimic a lullaby in a voice that sounds exactly like a distorted recording of your mother from 20 years ago. If you find this recording, if this camera is sitting alone on the forest floor, do not follow the red trail markers. The maps lie. Some paths in the Appalachians weren't carved by hikers. They were worn down by things that have been waiting for someone to lose their way. 2 days ago, I was just another solo hiker seeking the kind of isolation only the deep woods can provide. I wanted to disappear for a while, to trade the noise of the city for the stoic indifference of the mountains. I was heading for the dead-end vista. It's a trail most veterans avoid. The climb is vertical, the weather is unpredictable, and the cell service dies the second you pull into the gravel trailhead. It's the kind of place where you can be truly alone, or so the brochures say. The sun was warm when I started. The air smelled of damp earth and pine needles, that clean, sharp scent that makes you feel invincible. I had 70 pounds of gear on my back, a sturdy pair of boots, and a mind full of quiet. I felt like I owned the trail, but the woods have a way of humbling you. They let you feel like a king just long enough to lead you deep into the heart of the shadow, where the rules of the world don't apply anymore. The first glitch happened at the 3-mile marker. I found a campsite. It was tucked away in a perfectly circular clearing where the grass seemed to be scorched black. It wasn't my camp. I hadn't seen another soul since the trailhead. No footprints in the mud, no rustle in the brush. But there it was, a small gray mountain tent standing perfectly still. It was zipped tight from the outside. Not with a lock, but with heavy-duty industrial zip ties. Dozens of them, cinched so tight they bit into the fabric. And around the base of the tent there were shoes. Not pairs, just left-foot hiking boots. Dozens of them, all different sizes, some brand new, some rotted to the soles. They were lined up in a perfect circle, toes pointing directly at the tent, as if they were waiting for something to come out. The smell hit me then. It wasn't the rot of a dead animal or the stench of a stagnant pond. It was a sharp metallic tang, old copper, like a jar of pennies soaking in warm, fresh blood. I stood there, paralyzed for what felt like hours, waiting for a breath, a cough, a rustle from inside that gray nylon. Nothing. The silence was heavy, pressing against my eardrums like I was deep underwater. I told myself it was just some elaborate, sick trail art. Hikers get weird when they spend too much time alone. I pushed the copper taste to the back of my throat and kept walking. I didn't want to be there when the sun went down. But the forest was changing. For the next 2 miles, the bark on every single oak tree had been meticulously peeled away in long vertical strips, not by the claws of a cat or the antlers of a deer. It was done by fingers. I could see the narrow gouges where nails had dug into the soft white flesh of the wood, and then I saw the marks. Thousands of tiny, perfect tally marks were carved into the raw wood. They started at the roots and climbed up the trunks, higher than any man could reach without a ladder. Who has that much time? Who has that much focus? And then the realization chilled my marrow. Every single mark was angled toward the path, toward me. The forest wasn't empty. It was counting. It was documenting every step I took, every breath I wasted. I set up my own camp 5 miles away, my hands shaking so much I could barely stake the tent. I didn't build a fire. I didn't want to be a beacon in the dark. I crawled into my bag, clutching my knife, listening to the trees groan in the wind. But as the midnight chill settled in, the wind died down, and in that absolute silence, I heard it. Zip, zip. It was the sound of a zipper. It was slow, agonizingly slow, as if the person pulling it wanted me to hear every single tooth of the track clicking into place. It wasn't my tent. It was coming from right outside my flap. I held my breath, my heart hammering against the floorboards of my chest, and then came the whisper. 74. The exact number of tally marks on the last tree I had passed. I didn't move for 3 hours. I laid there in the dark, my fingers cramped around the hilt of my knife, waiting for the fabric of my tent to rip open. But nothing happened. The whispering didn't return. The zipper sound vanished as if it had never existed. By the time the sky turned a bruised, sickly gray, I had convinced myself I was losing it. Isolation madness. It's a real thing. The brain hates a vacuum. If it doesn't have enough stimuli, it starts inventing its own. I crawled out of my tent, my joints stiff from the cold. I expected to see a monster. I expected to see a man with a knife. Instead, I saw something much worse. My campsite was exactly as I had left it, except for one thing. My boots, which I had placed inside my tent at the foot of my sleeping bag, were gone. I looked out into the clearing, and there they were, 10 feet away, sitting side by side on a flat stone. They weren't just thrown there, they were cleaned. Every speck of Appalachian mud had been meticulously scraped off. They looked brand new, mocking me with their perfection. My mind went into overdrive, trying to rationalize the impossible. Maybe I sleepwalked. Maybe a hiker with a very specific, very clean obsession had stumbled upon me. I put the boots on, the leather feeling unnaturally cold against my skin. I didn't even bother making coffee. I just packed. I needed to find the trailhead. I needed the sound of a highway, the hum of an engine, anything that belonged to the world of the living. I pulled out my GPS, but the screen flickered with digital vomit. The coordinates were jumping wildly. 1 second I was in North Carolina. The next I was in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. I threw it into the dirt and pulled out my physical map. I traced the line back toward the Dead End Vista trailhead. It was a straight shot south, simple, but the woods had moved. I hiked for 4 hours, keeping the sun to my left. I should have reached the creek crossing by noon. Instead, I found myself standing in front of a massive, hollowed-out oak tree. It was dead, its branches reaching up like charred skeletal arms, and nailed to the trunk was a heavy, rusted metal box, an old Forest Service fire cache, the kind they haven't used since the 50s. The padlock was missing. Inside, there were no emergency blankets or rations. There was a single leather-bound journal. The pages were yellowed, brittle, and smelled of that same suffocating copper. I shouldn't have opened it, but when you're drowning in a mystery, you'll grab any anchor, even if it's made of lead. The handwriting inside was frantic, the ink fading into the parchment. It wasn't a logbook, it was a ledger, page after page of names, dates, weight, eye color, and then a column titled Marrow Quality. I flipped to the very last page, the ink still dark, almost as if it had been written minutes ago.
My name was there, my height, my blood type, my marrow quality was marked as prime. Beneath my name there was a sketch. It was a drawing of a man huddled behind a rotted cedar tree, clutching a tactical knife, his face twisted in a silent scream. It was me from 3 hours ago. The realization hit me like a physical blow. I wasn't being followed, I was being harvested. I looked up from the journal and the forest felt different. The trees seemed closer together. The tally marks I had seen earlier, they were everywhere now. on the rocks, on the leaves, even on my own fingernails. I could see tiny, faint scratches I hadn't noticed before. Then the sound returned, but it wasn't the whisper from the night before. It was a wet, heavy thud. Thump, thump, thump. Something massive was moving through the brush, but it wasn't breaking any branches. It was moving with a fluid, unnatural grace. I didn't run this time. I couldn't. My legs felt like they were rooted into the soil. I turned slowly, my eyes scanning the dense wall of green, and there, about 50 yards away, I saw it. It was standing behind a thin birch tree, but it was far too tall to be hidden. It was at least 8 feet of pale, translucent skin stretched over a frame of jagged bone. It had no face, only a vertical slit where the mouth should be, and 2 milky, lidless eyes that looked like wet pearls. It didn't attack. It just stood there, tilting its head at an angle that would have snapped a human neck. And then it opened that vertical slit. It didn't roar. It didn't growl. It spoke in my mother's voice. "Don't worry, honey," it whispered, the sound vibrating through the very air I was breathing. "We've already counted your ribs. There's plenty to go around." I turned and bolted, leaving my pack, my gear, and my sanity behind. I ran until my vision blurred into a smear of green and brown. But no matter how fast I went, I could hear it right behind me. Not footsteps, just the sound of 1,000 tiny zippers, all opening at once.
I didn't look back. I couldn't. Every time my boots hit the ground, the sound felt like it was echoing inside someone else's skull. The forest had stopped being a place. It had become a throat, and I was being swallowed. I ran until the sun became a jagged, bleeding wound on the horizon. My shins were raw from the briars, my breath coming in ragged, sobbing hitches. I found myself in a valley I didn't recognize, a place where the trees didn't grow straight. They twisted around each other like petrified snakes, their branches interlocking to form a canopy so dense that the remaining light felt heavy and gray. I stopped by a creek to splash water on my face, but when I looked down at the reflection, I didn't see myself. I saw a hollow-eyed stranger with tally marks carved on his forehead. I screamed and scrambled back, but the water didn't ripple. It wasn't water. It was a thick, black oil that smelled of that same suffocating copper. That's when I realized the trail markers had changed. They weren't red plastic squares anymore. They were pieces of skin. Human skin, nailed to the trees with rusted railroad spikes. Some of them still had hair attached. Some of them were fresh enough to be dripping. My mind snapped. I started laughing, a high, shrill sound that didn't feel like it belonged to me.
I sat down in the mud and began to pull the tally marks out of the dirt with my bare hands, shouting at the trees, daring them to come and finish it. I was waiting for the tall, pale thing to emerge from the shadows and take its marrow. But the forest is crueler than a predator. A predator kills you. The forest just keeps you. I found a cave. It wasn't a natural formation. The entrance was lined with the same left-foot boots I had seen earlier, hundreds of them, stacked like bricks. I walked inside because the outside didn't exist anymore. There was no north, no south, no trailhead. There was only the dark.
Inside, the walls weren't stone. They were soft. They pulsed. I ran my hand along the surface and felt a heartbeat, slow, deep, and ancient. This wasn't a cave. It was a lung. I reached into my pocket and found a flashlight I didn't remember packing. I clicked it on. The beam of light hit the back of the chamber, and I saw them. The hikers, the ones from the journal. They weren't dead, not exactly. They were sewn into the walls of the cave, their limbs stretched thin like the pale creature I had seen in the woods. Their eyes were wide, milky pearls, staring at nothing. Their mouths had been stitched shut with the same heavy-duty zip ties I'd seen on the tent. And they were all humming. Thousands of voices, muffled by skin and plastic, vibrating in a low, discordant harmony. It was the lullaby. They were the source of the sound. Each one of them had a small glass jar at their feet, and inside those jars, a dark, viscous liquid was slowly dripping from their joints. "Marrow," I whispered. My own voice sounded like breaking glass. I turned to run, but the entrance of the cave was gone. In its place was a wall of that same gray nylon fabric, a giant tent flap. I reached for the zipper, but there was no tab. It was being zipped from the other side. Zip, zip. The space began to shrink. The walls of the cave started to press inward. The humming grew louder, vibrating my very teeth out of their sockets. I felt a sharp, stinging pain in my spine. I reached back and felt it, a cold plastic zip tie threading itself through my skin. I wasn't a hiker anymore. I was inventory. I began to hum. I didn't want to, but my throat moved on its own. I felt my limbs beginning to stretch, my skin turning translucent and cold. I looked at the wall next to me and saw a space, an empty spot perfectly sized for a man of my height and weight. 75, the forest whispered through 1,000 mouths. The humming. It becomes a physical weight. It's not just a sound anymore. It's a vibration that unties your DNA.
My teeth feel loose in my gums. My vision is a strobe light of gray and red. I am pinned against the pulsing wall of the cave, the zip tie cold and rigid as it threads through the muscle of my shoulder. I am being integrated. No. The word didn't come from my mouth. It came from the marrow, a spark of pure, primal rejection. I didn't grab my knife. I didn't have it anymore. I used my fingernails. I dug them into the soft, pulsing wall, into the lung of the forest. The cave screamed. It wasn't a sound a throat makes. It was the sound of 1,000 trees snapping at once. The wall buckled. A thick black ichor sprayed across my face, warm, bitter, and smelling of 1,000 years of rot. The pressure of the zip tie snapped. I fell forward, my knees hitting a pile of those left foot boots. I didn't think. Thinking is for the living, and I was something else now. I crawled. I pushed through the stack of boots, their leather skins feeling like wet tongues against my hands. I reached the nylon wall, the giant tent flap, and I didn't look for a zipper. I bit into it. I tore at the fabric with my teeth until I tasted salt and chemicals. I burst through. I wasn't in the valley anymore. I was back at the trailhead, or a version of it. The sky was the color of a fresh bruise. The trees were gone. In their place were thousands of tall, thin poles made of white bone, each draped with sheets of gray nylon. A city of tents, a factory of skin. The tall thing, the pale watcher, was there. But there wasn't just one. There were hundreds. They were moving between the bone poles, their long needle-like fingers harvesting the jars of black marrow from the hanging hikers. They all stopped. Hundreds of milky pearl eyes turned toward me. "The tally is wrong," they whispered. The sound didn't come from them. It came from the ground beneath my feet. One escaped the skin. One is still raw. I ran, not toward the road. There was no road. I ran toward the only thing that looked real, a single gnarled oak tree that hadn't been turned into a pole yet. As I reached it, I saw a digital camera hanging from a branch by the strap. My camera. I grabbed it. I hit record, not because I thought I'd survive, but because a witness is the only thing a harvest fears. The pale things didn't run. They drifted. They moved like smoke, closing the gap with terrifying fluid speed. Their vertical mouths began to click, a frantic rhythmic sound like a swarm of insects. "Honey, come back," my mother's voice called out from the tallest one. "You aren't finished counting yet." I looked at the camera screen. In the reflection of the glass, I saw my own face. It was gone. My skin was translucent. I could see my own skull through my cheeks. I could see the black marrow pumping through my veins. I wasn't escaping. I was just carrying the forest out with me.
I threw myself into the dark ravine behind the oak tree, the camera clutched to my chest. As I fell, I saw the tally marks on the bark of the trees flash by. 76, 77, 78. I hit the water. It was ice. It was needles. It was the end.
The water didn't just carry me, it tried to dissolve me. I remember the sensation of the black marrow in my veins fighting against the mountain stream. It was a war inside my blood. I remember hitting the rocks, my bones snapping like dry kindling, but I didn't feel pain. You don't feel pain when you're becoming something else. I woke up in a bed with white sheets that felt like sandpaper against my translucent skin. The lights in the hospital were too bright. They felt like needles stabbing into my milky eyes. The doctors called it a miracle. They said I had been missing for 22 days. They said I had survived on grit and luck. They didn't see the zip tie scars. They didn't hear the humming. I'm back in my apartment now. It's a small place on the 12th floor, far away from the Appalachians, far away from the trees. I've locked every window. I've welded the fire escape shut. I live in the dark because the light reminds me of what I saw in that cave. But the woods, they don't care about distance. Yesterday, I went to the bathroom to wash my face. I avoided the mirror for weeks, but I finally looked. My face looks human again, mostly. But my eyes, the pupils are gone. They are just two wet white pearls. And when I breathe, I don't smell the city. I smell copper, sharp, metallic, fresh copper. I sat down at my computer to delete the footage from the camera. I wanted to erase it. I wanted to pretend I was just a man who got lost. But the file wouldn't delete. I opened it, and the screen didn't show the ravine. It showed my apartment, my bedroom. The footage was from last night. It showed me sleeping, and standing over me was a figure. It was tall, so tall its head was pressed against the ceiling. It didn't have a face, just that vertical slit. It was holding a needle of bone, and it was meticulously sewing my shadow to the floorboards. I checked the floor. There, underneath my rug, are thousands of tiny, perfect tally marks carved into the wood. The harvest isn't over. They didn't lose me. They just moved the farm. I can hear it now. It's not coming from outside. It's coming from my closet. The slow, rhythmic sound of a zipper. Zzz, zzz, zip. I'm looking at the closet door right now. A thin, pale hand with fingers too long to be human is gripping the edge of the wood. It's not trying to hide anymore. 100, it whispers in my own voice. If you're listening to this, check your skin. Check the back of your neck. Check the space under your bed. Because once you hear the humming, you've already been counted. And they never, ever miscount. Don't go into the woods.
But then again, the woods are already inside you, aren't they?